The girl in the back of the classroom bell rang with a long echo through the hallways of Crestwood Academy. It was the first day of the fall semester. The sky outside was soft gray, with hints of light pushing through the clouds. The parking lot buzzed with luxury cars. Students in designer jackets spilled out carrying phones, coffee, and attitudes. This was not a normal school. It was a private academy known for excellence, for legacy, for students whose last names opened doors even before they spoken. Among them walked a boy who didn't want to be noticed. His name was Keanureeves. Was tall, quiet, his hair messy in a way that didn't seem careless, just natural. He wore simple clothes, not because he couldn't afford better, but because he didn't care for show. His father was Keanu Reeves, and though most students whispered about it, Zane never spoke about his dad. Like books, more than cameras, music, more than money and peace, more than noise. At that morning, as he walked into his new classroom, he paused at the door, scanned the room, and spotted the empty seat beside the window. He headed for it, but just as he was about to sit, he noticed the girl in the seat beside it sat with her back slightly hunched, her head down, her hands fidgeting with a loose thread on her sleeve. Her backpack was old, her shoes scuffed, and her desk perfectly clean. Zane hesitated just a second, enough for his father, who had walked him in that day, to notice. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, gently. Maybe try sitting somewhere else, he said softly, not judging, just suggesting. Zane looked up at him, confused why Keanu didn't answer directly. He just offered a soft smile and nodded toward the middle of the room, where the loud kids sat already, laughing, throwing paper balls, and showing off. Zane looked at them, then looked back at the girl. Her name was Marina. One in the room knew her story, yet no one cared to ask. She was new. She had transferred from a public school across the city on a full scholarship. Her mother cleaned offices at night. Her father had passed away 3 years ago from a condition they couldn't afford to treat. Mary had fought to be there, not with fists, but with grades, with essays, with hours spent reading under flickering lights, and the scholarship she earned came with pride and pressure. Resh had arrived early that morning and picked the seat by the window, hoping no one would notice her, but now she felt the weight of Aisha and hesitated again. Then, without another word, he sat down beside her. Keanu said nothing, but his eyes held a flicker of concern. Zane didn't speak to Mary right away. He simply opened his notebook and began to write something. Teacher walked and called for attention, and the class began, but Zane couldn't focus, kept wondering why his father didn't want him to sit there. Right didn't make sense. Ish hadn't done anything wrong. As class ended and the students stood to leave, Zane dropped his pen near Mary's foot. She picked it up silently and handed it to him. Thank you, he said gently, nodded, but didn't speak. Over the next few days, they kept sitting together, slow, a pattern for me. Other students avoided her whispers. Start we, is he sitting with her? Maybe he pities her, maybe she's smarter than she looks. Shane ignored them. Marie continued showing up early, finishing her assignments first, and leaving without waiting around until one rainy morning everything changed. Zane arrived late, his shoes soaked, his hoodie dripping, walked into class and found someone else in his seat. One of the loud boys, Griffin, was laughing, tossing a pencil back and forth. Reeves, you want this seat back, he joked. Zane stayed calm. I always sit there. Griffin smirked. Not today, bro. It's just a seat. And looked at Mary, who had gone stiff, her eyes focused on her notebook like it was a shield. Griffin leaned back, kicked his feet up on the desk, and looked around the room for applause. But none came. Zane didn't argue. He walked out of the room. Ryan watched, but no one followed except one person. Keanu was waiting in the hallway. He had been there to drop off something Zane forgot at home, but now he stood in silence as his son walked past him with quiet fire in his steps. Dad, Zane said softly, why did you ask me not to sit with her on the first day? Keanu looked surprised. I didn't mean it that way. I was just trying to protect y'all from what? From being singled out, being judged. People are not always kind. Zanazane looked down, then said something that would stay with Keanu forever. If I need protection from kindness, then I've already lost who I am. Keanu didn't reply, watched as his son walked back into the classroom and stood beside Griffin. This is my seat, Zane said calmly. Griffin laughed again. Make me move? Zane said nothing. He simply picked up the chair, placed it at an empty desk in the back, and sat there beside Mary again. Even if the table didn't match, even if the space was tied, had made a choice. And Mary noticed after class. She spoke for the first time. Do you keep sitting here? She asked softly. Because I want to. He said, but Wildcats, you remind me what real strength looks like. She didn't know how to respond to that for the first time. And here someone had looked at her, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with honesty. Smiled the smallest smile, but it was real. Keanu watched all of this from the car that afternoon as he picked Zane up. He said nothing on the drive home, but that night he opened his laptop and wrote a message to the school principal. It was short and simply, every child deserves to be seen. Let's start building a culture around things. Signed his name but asked that it be read anonymously to the staff next morning. The principal read the message. During a teachers' meeting, some teachers nodded, some rolled their eyes, but one teacher, a young woman named Miss Ray, took it seriously, started pairing students differently during group projects. She asked students to share one thing they admired about someone in the class. She didn't say why, but she had seen what happened in room 12. She had seen KeanuReeves choose to sit beside a girl no one knew had happened next would go far beyond Crestwood Academy. It would reach Holmes' family's community. As one boy refused to change his seat, and one father began to question what he had once believed was protection. Asterisk, a voice louder than silence. Be the second week of the semester. The whispers had grown louder. They were no longer just background noise. They had become a daily presence. Inside the hallways of Crestwood Academy, KeanuReeves, the quiet son of a world-famous actor, had become the subject of attention, not because of who his father was, but because of who he chose to sit with. Students couldn't understand it. They joked behind lockers, asked questions, and passing even created a fake poll on social media titled "Most Confusing Friendship in School." Zane saw the post and didn't react. Wasn't trying to make a point, was just trying to be human. Marie, on the other hand, began to feel the weight of all the attention. She had spent years learning how to stay small, how to blend, and how not to make waves. But now every day she walked into class, it felt like a spotlight was following her. At a warm, a harsh neat was Miss Ray, who first noticed the changes, had started paying closer attention ever since the anonymous message from a parent spoke about creating a culture where every child is seen to watch. The way Mary kept her head down lower than before, the way she finished her answers faster, the way she stopped raising her hand after class. Miss Ray asked her to stay behind. Marie, is everything okay? Marie hesitated. I'm fine. You don't have to be fine all the time. You know. Mary didn't reply. Miss Ray handed her a small notebook. If you ever want to write instead of speak, you can write here and give it to me. No pressure. Mary took the notebook with a quiet thank you. That night she stared at the blank pages for hours before writing a single sentence. I don't know why kindness feels like danger. The next day, she handed the notebook back to Miss Ray, who read the line and closed it gently. She didn't say much, just placed a small blue sticker on the cover in the shape of a star. While Zane was facing his own version of silence, students who once nodded at him in the halls now walked past like he didn't exist. Some teachers who once smiled now looked through him. His locker was jammed. Twice someone scratched the word traitor into his desk. Zane told no one, but Keanu knew something was off. At dinner, he watched Zane eat quietly. Anything happened at school? Zane shrugged. Nothing new. You seem heavy. Sanzane looked up slowly. Do you ever regret standing up for someone? Keanu paused, thought deeply, then said, only when I waited too long to do it. Zane nodded and said, sometimes I think people would rather watch someone suffer than ask why. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. You're learning things most adults don't even understand. You didn't answer my question before. Zane did. Which one? Why? You didn't want me to sit with her that first day. Keanu exhaled. He was afraid that people would make her pain your problem, and I realize now that pain shared is how it stops growing. Zane said nothing, but inside he felt something shift. Next morning, something unexpected happened. Marie wasn't at school. Her seat sat empty, the window beside it fogged from the cold. Zane kept glancing at the clock at the hallway at the door, but she never came to be lunch. Miss Ray made an announcement. Mary will be out for a few days. She's going through something personal. Zane knew it wasn't just personal, it was pressure. Later that day, he asked Miss Ray if he could drop off something at Mary's home. I'm not supposed to give out addresses, she said, but he simply handed her a note and said, can you give her this? Then that evening, Mary opened the envelope and read the note and said, I don't care where you sit, just come back. You're not alone. She held the note to her chest and for the first time in days let the tears fall. Without fighting theme. In the third day, Mary returned. She walked into class, her head held just a little higher, and her desk, it had changed. It now had a small sticker like the one Miss Ray had placed on her notebook. A blue star. Students asked what it meant, but no one explained until another student received. A boy named Nico, who struggled with stuttering, answered a question in front of the class. For the first time, got a sticker. Then a girl who had been bullied for her weight shared a poem in literature class, got a sticker, and slowly the blue stars began to spread. Became a quiet symbol of courage, and not for being perfect, but for being real. School began to shift. One afternoon, during an assembly, the principal announced something unexpected. Starting this semester, we will introduce a peer voice council made up of students selected not by popularity or grades, but by characters. On was chosen. Mary was too. They sat at opposite ends of the stage during the announcement, but when it ended, they found each other in the hallway and smiled. We're not that different, Zane said. Mary replied, maybe that's why it works. Keanu attended the first council meeting as a guest observer, sat in the back. watched his son speak clearly, not loudly, but with calm. Watched Mary offer suggestions that were wise beyond her years, and when it was over, he walked up to both of them. "You to remind me of something." He said, "What Zane asked it off the kind of world I want to live in," turned to Mary. "And a daddy was wrong that day, and I thank you for proving it." Mary didn't say anything, but she reached into her bag and pulled out the note. "Zane had routinely carry this every day," she said, "because it reminds me that silence doesn't mean no one cares." Shane looked at his father, and Keanu felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hopping out, the kind you find in movies, but the kind you find in classrooms and small desks and quiet accent choices. That changed everything. Asterisk the ripple that reached beyond the teeth gates of Crestwood Academy were tall, painted dark green, and stood like silent guards over privilege and power for years. They had marked the line between those who belong and those who didn't, between wealth and want, between tradition and change. But something had begun to shift inside those gates, and it started with a boy who chose kindness over comfort, and a girl who stopped hiding her strengths. Zane and Mary continued to meet in the quiet corners of the school library, not for secrecy, but for peace. It was there they began working on something more than homework, something that would outlast tests and grades. A proposal. It started as a simple idea, a kindness board, a place in the hallway where students could post anonymous notes of encouragement, appreciation, or support. It wouldn't be tracked or graded, it would just be human. Miss Ray supported the idea immediately. The principal agreed with hesitation, and the board went up 2 days later, made of recycled wood, painted by the art club, and placed just outside the cafeteria. First it was empty, then one note appeared, written in blue ink on a torn notebook page. "You are not your mistakes, you are your growth." Students passed it without comment, but someone read it, someone who needed it, and the next day another note appeared, and then another. Soon the board was full. Mary stood in front of it one afternoon and noticed a folded note tucked into the corner. She opened it slowly. It read, "Thank you for being the first to be." Brevesh smiled, not because she knew who wrote it, but because it meant someone was listening. Meanwhile, outside the school walls, Keanu Reeves was facing a dilemma. He had been invited to speak at a global education summit in Geneva. The topic was the future of learning values in a fast world. He didn't plan to accept at first. Public speaking was never his favorite, and he often preferred doing good quietly. But when he heard about the kindness board from Zane, something shifted inside him. Accepted the invitation day, he boarded the plane. Zane handed him a folder. It contained photos of the board, student testimonies, and a letter signed by Mary herself. "If you're going to speak, Dad, speak for the ones who don't get asked to speak for themselves." Keanu smiled and said, "I will." In Geneva, standing on a stage in front of global leaders, educators, and influencers, Keanu spoke not about fame or film, but about a boy who sat beside someone no one saw. Spoke about blue star stickers, about a notebook passed between a teacher and a student, about a girl who carried a note like armor, and a school that slowly began to remember its heart. Ended his speech with the same words Mary had written in her letter. "See us before we become invisible." The room was silent for a moment, then applause followed. Not polite applause, but the kind that grows from truth. News of his speech spread quickly. Articles were written, headlines praised him, but Keanu deflected all attention back to where it belonged. Gave full credit to Crestwood Academy and to the students behind Ida. Back at school, Mary and Zane were unaware of the growing attention until reporters showed up at the school gate asking for interviews. Principal refused politely, but inside he felt something he hadn't in years. Pride, not in achievements, but in atmosphere. He called a school-wide assembly, and for the first time allowed students to speak freely at the podium. Stepped up nervously, gripping her note cards. But as she looked out at her classmates, many of whom had once ignored her, she took a deep breath and spoke from memory. "Came here thinking I had to be smaller to survive, but I've learned that being kind is not being weak, being seen is not being needy, and helping someone else shine does not make your light dim." There was silence, then a wave of applause. Students stood, teachers too, and Zane beside her simply said, "You just changed everything again." Outside the gates, something else was happening. Schools from around the city reached out, wanting to learn more about the kindness board, about the peer voice council, about what Crestwood was doing differently. Soon Zane and Mary were invited to speak in neighboring schools. They traveled by bus, carried posters, and shared their story with students who had never heard of them. They didn't wear uniforms or pretend to be experts. They just told the truth, how one choice had changed everything, how one note had broken years of silence, how being brave doesn't always mean standing tall. Sometimes it just means staying in your seat. Keanu watched all of it unfold with quiet wonder. He never tried to take the spotlight. He simply supported from the background, occasionally driving them to events, helping them rehearse, encouraging them to stay grounded. Even after a long day of school visits, Zane asked his father something he had never asked before. "Do you think we actually made a difference?" Keanu looked at him seriously. "Then said you didn't just make a difference, so you reminded people what?" It feels like the matter. Mary heard those words and carried them with her because she still had battles to fight on afternoon. She came home to find her mother crying over an eviction notice. They were behind on rent again, the scholarship covered tuition, but not life. Mary didn't say anything. She just sat beside her mother and held her hand. Later that night, she opened her laptop and began to write, not to a friend, not to a school, but to the people who had listened. She posted a blog titled, "The Girl Beside the Window." It told her story in it, the polished version, the real one, about growing up in a one-bedroom apartment, about studying under broken lights, about walking into Crestwood feeling like a ghost and being seen by one boy who didn't need to understand her to stand beside her. Blog went viral not because it was sensational, but because it was censored. Nations came in offers of support job leads for her mother, interviews, requests for her to speak. Marie turned down the TV spots. Didn't want to become a symbol, she just wanted to stay real. Zane helped her set up a small foundation. With the funds they raised, they called it the Quiet Chair Project, aimed at placing student-led kindness boards and peer councils in underfunded schools. The name was simple because it all started with a chair that no one else wanted to sit in, and the boy who chose it anyway. The moment the world paused, the Quiet Chair Project grew faster than anyone expected. What began as a story shared through blogs and word of mouth had now reached classrooms across the country. In cities, villages, and small towns, children were building kindness boards, writing anonymous notes, sitting beside the quiet ones, the different ones, the ones no one ever noticed before. Mary never imagined her words would become a movement. Just wanted her life to matter, and now it was changing the world. But with every step forward came new weight. As the attention grew, so did the pressure. The foundation was receiving media requests nonstop. Journalists wanted interviews, celebrities were tagging the project in their posts, schools wanted visits, speeches. Message on through it all. Mary stayed grounded until one morning, when she walked into her small kitchen and found her mother collapsed on the floor. She rushed to her side, heart pounding, calling her name over and over, her hands trembling as she dialed the ambulance. That her mother had worked 2 jobs for years, slept for hours a night, never complained, never asked for restand. Now her body had given out. Hospital said it was exhaustion combined with malnutrition, stress, and an untreated heart condition. Mary sat by her mother's side all night, unable to cry, unable to speak, only able to listen to the soft beeping of machines. When Keanu and Zane arrived the next morning, Mary didn't lift her eyes. She only said one thing, "You forgot why I started." Zane sat beside her without a word, and Keanu said something that Mary would never forget. Sometimes we carry the world so gently that we forget to carry ourselves. Marie finally looked up, her eyes full of pain. "What's the point of helping everyone if I can't even help her?" Keanu kneeled down beside her and said, "The point isn't to save the world. It's to show it that we all deserve saving." Those words didn't fix everything, but they reminded her that she wasn't alone. The next few weeks were a blur. Mary stepped away from the foundation. Zane took over some of her work. Miss Ray helped manage the messages, and volunteers formed from the very schools the project had inspired stepped up, and slowly Mary focused on healing her mother and herself. During that time, something powerful happened. Schools began sending videos, not of speeches or events, but of small moments. A boy giving his lunch to a girl who had none, a teacher placing a blue star sticker on a student's desk after they spoke up, a group of students building a kindness board from scrap wood and placing it in the hallway. Without being a skid, movement had grown beyond its founders. It had taken root, and then the moment came that no one saw coming. An international education conference in New York reached out to Keanu, Zane, and Mary. They wanted the 3 of them to deliver the closing speech. Marie hesitated at first. She wasn't sure if she was ready to speak again in front of so many eyes. But Zane said something that made her pal say, "You don't have to be perfect to speak. You just have to be honest." Mary agreed. Night of the event arrived, and the stage was grand. Spotlights, rows of cameras, world leaders, teachers, and students from every continent sat watching, waiting. Keanu stepped up first, spoke briefly about fear, about silence, about the danger of doing nothing, and then he stepped back and let his son speak and share the story of the chair, the board, the stickers, the decision that had changed his life. Then Mary stepped forward. She didn't bring no cards or speech, just looked into the crowd. "And Sadie used to believe that I had to earn my place in the world, that if I wasn't excellent, loud, confident, or popular, I didn't deserve to be heard. But then one person sat beside me without asking me to change it. In that silence, I found my voice." Paused. Then a dead build walls so easily around people we don't understand. But sometimes all it takes is a chair and no to look to. Remind someone that they are not invisible. The room was silent, and then a wave of applause began it. Because she was famous, but because she was right after the speech. Hundreds of educators approached them asking how to bring the Quiet Chair project to their schools, how to train students to lead with empathy, how to remind children that kindness is a form of intelligence. Cohn stayed mostly in the background, smiling gently, listening deeply, watching his son and Mary lead on. Morning, a letter arrived at the foundation headquarters. It had no name, only a return address from a small school in a war-torn region. The letter read, placed a chair at the back of our class and wrote beside it, "If you need someone to sit beside you, I will." And one day a boy who never spoke sat there, and the next day someone sat with him, and the next day he smiled for the first time. Thank you. Mary read the letter 3 times and whispered to herself, "This is what matters." And when Zane entered the room, he saw tears in her eyes, not from pain, but from purpose. Said our next project was born, the DIA Global Toolkit, translated into multiple languages, simple guides for schools without funding, without technology, without support, just hearts and hands. Toolkit was named Project Beside because it wasn't about saving anyone. Ace sitting beside the Moss. Mary and Zane traveled to launch the program. Keanu stayed home, but wrote letters to every school they visited, handwritten, signed quietly. One ended with the same line, "And never underestimate what begins with kindness." And slowly, the world began to remember that kindness is not weakness, that silence can be strength, and that the smallest act of sitting beside someone can change not just a life but the world. Asterisk, the girl who didn't need saving autumn had painted the city in shades of gold and read the trees outside Crestwood Academy swayed gently in the wind, and the sun peeked through the clouds like it too was watching something beautiful unfold inside the school walls. A quiet transformation had taken root. The kindness board was no longer a novelty, it had become part of the school's heartbeat. The blue star stickers had become a silent badge of courage, and the empty chair in every classroom was now known as the Quiet Chair, waiting not for someone broken, but for someone brave enough to be seen. With every movement comes resistancia. New family had joined the school, a powerful one. Their daughter Eloise was brilliant, sharp, and born into wealth, the kind of wealth that moved things behind the scenes. Her father was a powerful investor, and her mother had once been on the school's board. Eloise had always been told she was special, and in many ways she spoke with elegance, debated with clarity, and carried herself like someone who had never been ignorant. She didn't understand Mary and Zane's stories, didn't understand why people clapped when Mary spoke in assemblies or why students wore shirts with quotes from the Quiet Chair project. Didn't dislike Mary, but she didn't understand Heron Day. During a literature class, the teacher, Miss Ray, asked everyone to share a story that had changed their lives. Mary went last. She spoke softly about a night when she had no dinner, about a morning when her mother gave her the last piece of bread, about how she came to school with an empty stomach, but a full heart. Always raised her hand after Mary finished and said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, held it, "We be celebrating success, not survival." Class went still. Marie looked down for a moment, then said, "Sometimes survival is the success." The room stayed quiet, and Miss Ray said nothing, just let the silence speak. After class, Mary walked alone to the library, but Zane was already there waiting. "You okay?" he escaped. Mary nodded, but her eyes held questions. "Saw, am I making this school?" The soft Zane looked at her directly and said, "No, you're making it stronger in a way most people don't understand yet." Later that evening, Keanu came home to find Zane staring at an old photo. It was from the early days of the project, when the kindness board was still made of cardboard and misspelled words. "Remember?" the Zane asked. Keanu smiled. "Of course I did." Zane asked something he had never asked before. "Have you ever been invisible?" Keanu sat down and thought deeply. "As I have," he said, "when I lost people I loved, when cameras went away, when I walked into a room and no one saw the person behind." The fast as Zane nodded, then said, "He think Mary still feels invisible." Summer team. Keanu looked at his saw. "Maybe that's because people like Eloise don't know what they don't see." The next day, Miss Ray introduced a new assignment: write a letter to someone in the school who had changed your perspective. Students groaned, some rolled their eyes, but one by one, they started writing. Eloise struggled with the assignment. She didn't know what to write. She didn't believe anyone had changed her view. But that night she went home and reread Mary's blow girl beside the window. Read the part about the note Zane gave her, part about her mother fainting in the kitchen, the part about being brave just to show up, and for the first time Eloise felt something unfamiliar, shame. The next morning, Mary opened her locker and found an envelope with her name on it. Inside was a letter from Eloise. "Still don't fully understand you, but I think that's because I've never needed to be understood. I respect you more than I know how to say." Mary folded the letter slowly and placed it inside her notebook. When she walked into class, Eloise looked at her, nodded once, and said quietly, "Thank you for not giving up that day." Something changed, not loudly, but deep. Live project beside began reaching countries they never dreamed of reaching. Schools without chairs began using mats. Teachers began using story stickers, became bracelets made of string. Children who had never seen computers shared photos of their kindness. Boards made from chalk on walls. Murray and Zane traveled to a school built from shipping containers on the edge of a refugee camp. There, they met a girl named Fatima who had started her own version of the project using rocks instead of paper. She wrote words like hope, trust, and courage on each one and placed them in a circle in the yard. She said, "When someone feels forgotten, they can sit in the middle and be remembered." Murray sat in the circle. Fatima placed a rock with the word enough in her lap, and for the first time in a long time, Mary felt healed, not fixed, just whole. When they returned home, Mary walked into the hospital, where her mother was finally strong enough to sit by the window. And she said, "You didn't raise a hero, you raised a girl who knows she doesn't need to be saved to be worth Yan." Her mother whispered back, "You were never broken." Zan stood in the doorway and smiled. They had all grown in silence in seats no one wanted, in spaces no one celebrated, and now they were. That week, the foundation received a letter from the president of an international education board. They wanted to present Mary and Zane with an award for youth leadership. Keanu was invited to, but Mary declined. Say, the words are for moments, but kindness is a practice. Instead, they used the award funds to build libraries in 5 low-income schools, each named the Quiet Light Room. No ceremony, no speeches, just shelves full of books and one chair in the corner with a blue star stitched into the cushion and a sign that read, "Sit here if you feel invisible, Samin will come. Simeon always does." Asterisk, the boy who remembered it was the end of the school year at Crestwood Academy, but it felt more like a beginning. Flowers lined the walkways, not because of a celebration, but because students had planted them as part of the kindness project. Teachers had started sharing morning reflections in class, not as a rule, but as a habit, and the quiet chair was now part of every room, even the principal's office. Mary walked down the hallway slowly, her hand trailing the lockers. The same hallway where she once walked like a shadow, now she walked like someone who belonged in it, because she had changed, but because the world around her had. Met Zane at the kindness board. The notes were overflowing again. So many stories of thank yous, apologies, encouragements, and even silent cries for help. Zane pulled a note from the corner and handed it to Maria. Reddy was going to leave school today, but someone sat beside me in the cafeteria. "Now I think I'll stay a little longer." Mary folded the note and put it in her pocket. That afternoon, Keanu arrived to pick them up, and they all went for ice cream like they used to before the world knew their names, before the blogs and speeches and interviews. They sat on a bench under a tree laughing about something simple and small, and for a moment everything felt beautifully normal. Keanu looked at his son and Mary and said, "Do you ever think about how this all started?" Zane not date a child, a choice. Mary, a date, a moment no one thought mattered, but it did. A few weeks later, the school invited them to speak at the graduation ceremony. But this time they didn't want a speech, they wanted to tell a story. So Mary and Zane stood together on stage and told the story of the quiet chair at the global movement. Not the awards or headlines, just the beginning. How a boy almost didn't sit beside a girl who his father told him to choose differently, how he did, and how that choice echoed through a school and then a city and then the world. The audience sat still as they spoke, not because they were famous, but because they were familiar. Students saw themselves in Mary, teachers saw themselves in Miss Ray, parents saw their hopes in Keanu, and for once everyone understood that greatness doesn't always shout some mediums. It whispers. After the ceremony, Mary went back to the classroom one last time to gather her things. She stood by the window and remembered that first day, her hand on the desk, her heart in her throat, and then she noticed something new. A girl sitting alone in the corner looking out the window. Mary walked over and sat beside her, not saying anything at first, just being there. After a while she said softly, "You don't need to speak for me to hear you." The girl looked at her and whispered, "Thank you for sitting here." Zane walked into the room moments later and smiled at what he saw. Then he looked at Mary and said, "Full circle." Mary nodded, but not the. And just the next beginning. In the months that followed, the Quiet Chair project continued to spread. It reached rural schools with no electricity. It reached refugee camps with no walls. It reached hearts that had never known what it felt like to be seen. And still, Marie never asked to be in the spotlight. Zane never used his father's name to open doors. Keanu never gave interviews, unless it was to sign just the dad. And one evening at home, Keanu sat with a notebook and began writing something he had thought about for a long time. It was a story for his younger self, for his song, for anyone who ever sat alone. It titled, "If Boy Who remember it because he did remember watching his son make a choice that changed the world. Remembered the girl who sat by the window and never asked for help, but welcomed it when it came and remembered. That real strength isn't loud, it's loyal, it's patient, it's choosing to sit beside someone when no one else willing. In that notebook he wrote these words: if you ever wonder where change begins, look for the quiet chair, the empty seat in the back, the one that waits for someone who remembers a mean like Yowen in schools and homes and hearts across the world. That chair waits, still not empty, just open always.